and you can do certain permits without having to go to planning and zoning. And we have the military leave first reading. I don't think those are ones that, or I'll ask, does anyone have any things they want to say about those? Questions, concerns, comments?
Did you guys get any updates to that? Did anybody get the update for that?
On the military leave?
Yes.
No.
Just what's in the council packet that we got on today at 3:16.
Okay. And I think that is updated. I think that has the new wording for that. Let me make sure, because we actually got it from Annie and Jesse.
That's good.
And we will let Chief go over any of the specifics with that. I'm just making sure this is exactly. You guys can keep talking and then I'll make sure that you guys have the updated language.
Okay. So that brings us, of course, to the last thing, which is sidewalks.
There we go. Well, we're doing better. That's what I can say. The one thing that, we had talked about at the last meeting was Mike, where the 6 inches deep part of the sidewalk is going to stop at beside the driveways, because where the driveway's at, a sidewalk has to be 6 inches deep. To go through, to try to just get right to the crux is I just like to see the line removed that talks about moving the 6 inch depth requirement to the next biggest square. And my reason for this is because that isn't the way they build it in MI. So if we were to, pass this the way it's written, every sidewalk in MI would not be up to code. It doesn't make any sense to do this. And this, I understand that there are municipalities that are including, that requirement on their sidewalks, but that really is important when you have trucks driving over it on busier, roads where you have trucks that will end up driving on the sidewalk. In Minerva, in the residential neighborhood, it's typically not done this way, is what I'm painfully trying to get through. So the one thing that I would like to see removed is from it's 1022-07E would be the part of the code that talks about extending the 6 inch depth requirement past where the driveway's at. Because it looks goofy to have an expansion material at that point or at the first block, because they're not done that way.
Chairman Bruger, if I can jump in. So we spent some significant time, obviously, talking about this between Mr. Flickinger and myself. Essentially, his recommendation came down that it's done two ways. MI, when we asked MI for what they did, EMH&T sent the specs over for Columbus's standards. Now, what we did here is we had, obviously, from a history standpoint, adopted Westerville standards. Now, Westerville had a weird little thing where they said, we're going to add this 12 inches. So rightfully so, Councilman Benedetti said, it's goofy. Why would we do that? And the last meeting, Mike obviously said, missed that one. Let's talk about that. So we did. We went back. We chatted about it. It turns out, as Mike stated, you have two options. You can go with what Councilman Benedetti said, which is remove the line entirely, or you can go ahead and include it. And that was the language there now is his email suggestion for how we include the language. So I copied it direct, simply because that is what Columbus requires in its code. Now, that basically makes a 6 inch block on either side. So the first block becomes 6 inches. We know people drive over, aren't exactly straight on sometimes where they enter the apron. And, you can do it a couple different ways. It's always easier to enforce this if we have a problematic situation with it on the books than if we don't have it on the books. So Mike's recommendation back to us was, this is Columbus's, this is what's done. EMH&T said we use Columbus's specs. So we're simply going with that. Now, in pouring it, I will be honest, in pouring an observation, typically speaking, when they, and I inspected, I think every single one of the sidewalk systems out there that were done around the apron, they
Oh, no, Eric.
a little deeper,
We're losing you.
5 and 6 inches. Hold on.
You broke up there, Eric. Can you back up a little bit? You inspected all the sidewalk systems at the aprons and what?
Sorry, one second. Can you hear me better now?
Yep. Yeah, you're
Okay,
back.
sorry about that. My Wi-Fi was flaking out there for a second.
Yep.
So yeah, I inspected each one, and I can tell you just from observation, they use a standard 2x4 as far as the framing goes. So it's definitively 4 inches across, from a depth standpoint. Now, at each of those sections, the block definitely ranges between 5 and 6 inches. Do I think it was a pure 6 inches consistently at each point? No, I don't. Do I think it was more than 4 inches? Yes, I do from an observation. So I would say average wise, it was probably about 5 inches. But as we stated, we think it's better to have it on the books than on the books, right? Because if we've got a situation where we've got someone who's got, and you see, I'm not done yet. Thank you, Councilman Benedetti. When we see situations where we've got people with 4 or 5 different people living in the house, 4 vehicles, they're driving over the sides. You see how people have extended their driveways in the new subdivision with the concrete sidings on each side by about, a foot. People drive over them. And so I'd rather have it to where if I see cracking and we've got to go back per this ordinance and enforce a change of the sidewalk because they've cracked it out by driving heavy vehicles on it, say, guys, make sure it's 6 inches, it's not that hard. So, but at the end of the day, it's the council's decision about how you want to do it. Removing it is fine. Leaving it the way it's written as per the engineers, requirement is fine too.
All right. So I just want to summarize what I've heard so far is that the spec to which it was built was supposed to be the 6 inches from the apron 1 block out because they
Correct.
built it to Columbus spec.
Correct.
And that's what we are currently with.
Okay, hold on.
Tony.
All right, I'm sorry. Finish. I'm sorry.
Okay, so that was the spec that it should have been built to.
Correct.
Okay, what you have said from your own observation is that in truth, it's probably more like 6 inches at the apron that tapers up to 4 inches at the other end to abut to the other end. So an average of 5 is probably the truth of the matter, but it's 6 inches right at the apron and then slopes up because it's a heck of a lot easier to dig a slanty line than it is to dig 6 inches straight across and then have 2-inch elevation and whatnot.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's
correct.
So that's a situation is that it was built to an average of the spec
Correct.
instead of
That's not true.
It is.
Because if that were the case, then there would be an expansion joint.
No, it's just a block.
Eric, all right. Is there anything else, Brian, that you're?
Nope, I have all the, so I'll say from what I've just heard, I'm fine with the language as it is in the as it's written, and I don't need a change.
But like I said, it's every one of these now, as soon as we pass it, they're not in compliance because there's no expansion joint where this takes off. And everybody else in the future that's going to put in a sidewalk is going to have to make sure if it's done correctly and that it's been dug down to 6 inches to the first block, and they have to put an expansion joint material at the first block, which is different. It looks goofy, guys. It's an aesthetic, and it accomplishes nothing here. All we're doing this in the likelihood maybe that somebody's driveway or sidewalk is going to break because of the traffic that goes over it in a residential neighborhood. It makes no sense, Eric. And why you have to continue to
have it on the books
this?
and not enforce it.
I'm not done yet, Eric. Why you have to continually fight this is beyond me. I just don't get it. It's not the way they build them, Eric. It's that simple. But you want to implement a code that's different than the way they were constructed. That's what you're advocating for. Makes no
Advocating
sense.
what my engineer has stated. So that's what I'm doing. And it's in there. Council can change it as they wish. Staff's made the
Okay, well, let
recommendation.
me ask someone else beside Brian. is who else? Because there's more, we've got more to talk about and the way this thing's numbered. This isn't it. You know, why can't our code resemble the way the sidewalks are built today? That's what I'm advocating for. And why you can't agree that that's the way it should be done, I'm struggling with.
Right. Well, I can certainly speak to my opinion on that, is that the code should read, in my opinion, the code should read to the spec they should have been built, right? And so if this spec represents how they should have been built, then that's what I would like memorialized in the code. Now, just because MI didn't build it correctly doesn't mean that we wouldn't want the next person to build it correctly.
As far as all the houses then being out of code, I would say they wouldn't be out of code because this ordinance speaks to replacing and repairing existing sidewalks
Correct.
and what needs to be done when you replace or repair, not on what your sidewalk has to be. Obviously, we're not going to ask people to redo their sidewalks that just got put down.
Also
So I don't
correct.
quite see the issue of people being out of code when this is about repairing and replacing.
Because
there any
you have an
way-
expansion joint
Go ahead,
spot
David.
where they're not at?
Is there any way to make language or add language that would make it clear that this is a piece of legislation for, or I guess that would apply more to the replacement or rebuilding of these sidewalks? I completely agree with Councilman Wolf that things should be, legislated or codified to the ideal. However, Tony, I can totally understand where you're coming from, that it makes very little sense to have something codified that instantly makes half of the village out of code. That makes no sense. I completely agree.
Well, and it requires them to redo, when they redo these things, they got to dig, this is the problem, is none of you guys have practical experience out there in the field and don't really understand what the unnecessary burden that it puts on the residents to do this correctly.
Well, we all certainly do have our differing lines of experience. I will.
Well, right, and here I am fighting with it. It's like, I don't really know, but blue's my favorite color, so this was in blue, and that's what I'm going to pick. I mean, it's that kind of
It was written more for the contractors, quite
All right,
frankly.
but can we
from an
just skip
engineer's
that?
standpoint.
You
So-
guys don't want to do that.
So in this regard, again, consulting with the engineer, consulting with MI, consulting with MI's engineer, they use Columbus's specs. Those specs are well established across this large city. And that's what most contractors, the vast majority, if they do sidewalks, are used to using. And we're making consistent like a lot of other municipalities. We'll admit that Westerville is slightly out of line with the 12 inches. Ask my
I mean,
engineer
for you to say,
some language. That's it.
for you to say, Eric, that they built them so basically, if they built them to the spec, it wouldn't look the way they do. You say that there was a spec that they were working towards, but the finished product isn't what you're describing. That's what because you say you inspected it, every one of them, and they all varied a little bit, and they were 5 inches to 4 inches. But the fact of the matter is that they weren't built the way the code says. But you say that they were. That the way the code reads is the way they were supposed to build them.
What I am saying is that the code, as has been recommended, we took it from Westerville's. We have made adoptions to it. We have taken it to our engineer. We asked MI, who asked their engineer to submit to what they did. They submitted a Columbus spec as to what they did. Go on what they did. Perhaps they did not build it exactly the same, but I would go back to Councilman Wolf and saying, we would want them to build it this way. So what's your main issue? You want them to take the expansion joint?
I'm done with this issue. Let's move on.
Okay, perfect. Let's move on.
I just like to say that because, Brian, this is in you've been on the council that has passed all kinds of other ordinances that are crap, and just going right along the lines of that. So let me move on to 1202, 122207.
Tony.
Z1.
Tony, hi, running a meeting.
I'm sorry.
Real quick then, before we move on to the next thing, Brian has already said he does not have a problem with leaving that in there, just so we can get this ready for tonight. I don't have a problem leaving it in there. Diane, do you have a problem leaving it in there, or would you rather it be removed?
I don't have, I don't have a problem leaving it in there from a technical point of view. My ears only perked up when Tony said that it would look bad. Aesthetically, it would be kind of gross. So that's the only thing that I can't judge. Everything else, I'm fine with it from any other logical point of view, but it is true, if the solution is going to make the street look like crap, then maybe I want to rethink the solution. I don't know.
Just unusual because the sidewalks are finished with a tooled like expansion joint every 4 feet. But the first one's going to have a 1/2 inch of this fibrous, expansion joint material at the joint that's typically just a tool finished joint. But that's the way we're going to do it, because someone might drive their truck over top of it and crack it.
Okay. Now we can see Tony, of course, wants it out. So, and I will check with Dave. Are you in favor of keeping it in or removing it?
Well, so going back to Councilman Wolf's statement, I completely agree that we do need, or we should ideally have, some, the codification of the ideal so that we have something to look back on and enforce should an issue arise in the future. However, the fact that Tony is, the fact that Councilman Benedetti is so insistent on this issue already not being correct, I can totally understand where he's coming from, because it doesn't make any sense to make or codify a statement or a requirement that we know everybody in this area is already not in compliance with. Is there any way we could apply some language that this would be more for future builds or repair, or
this ordinance is already for replacement of existing things and not for existing things. So this would only pertain to repairs and replacements done in the future.
Okay, so I guess I would be in favor of it, because I prefer that we have uniformity with the other municipalities surrounding us to make it consistent and easier for us to obtain contracts should we need them. But I must say I do hear where Tony is coming from. I would suspect he has a much greater practical experience with this construction than definitely I do, and I don't know. I just wish that it had been built properly from the get-go, then this issue would never have been a thing.
Yeah, well, MI's in it for making profits and getting out, not for staying around. But
right, and that's on us too, because we were supposed to be inspecting the work as it went along. So there's
overall,
that.
I think they did a wonderful job before anyone thinks like
There's
this.
nothing wrong with the way that it was done. That's what.
So the thing is I will say their driveways are so narrow that, and a lot of people have these big trucks these days, and I'm sure they're driving over the sidewalk all the time. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if it happened more frequently than perhaps Tony has suggested. I know our apron was crushed by a random act by a truck that was delivering something to even a neighbor, not even to us, but they had to replace it. It happens. Stuff happens.
It looks like we have at least 4 of the 6 of us in our informal little straw poll there, so I think you can just be left in. With anyone else with issues on this or any other issues?
Well, yeah, it would be, in the specifications part, and this is all the section that I'm talking about is in specifications. In the middle is the specifications, it starts off with sidewalk specifications, and then it goes after in the middle of W, it goes into
Where
apron.
are you right now, Tony? 'Cause I have it pulled up.
1022-07 W,
Yeah, okay, W.
like in the middle of that is where it changes from sidewalks to aprons. And it says there that, you know, aprons towards the bottom of that. Are you with me?
Mhm. For repairs of existing sidewalk with horizontal gaps between adjoining blocks measuring up to and including 1.5 inches.
See, in my opinion, this needs to be numbered. It needs to stop at W, and then where it says aprons, it needs to start an apron section. And then, because everything underneath that is talking about aprons. Because it's very confusing when you look at that.
Well, I think
Because
this
it
whole
goes from
document is pretty confusing, I have to say. I mean, I tried to go through it and sketch. I of course have an interest in trees, and so I kind of did a search for trees, and it is in 102204 and 102206 and 102207. And 102204 is saying trees must be replaced at the cost of neighbors if something happens. Then in 102206, it says you have permission to grind roots that are in your area. And if you lose a tree, too bad, so sad, and it's okay with us. And then in 102207, it says, you know, for valuable trees, you probably want to check with us first, and we might want you to work around them in terms of how you get permission to do and so I would, it's not the only place that it's, if I was looking, you know, to have, if trees are important and it's something you want to talk about, you would think you put trees in one place so that it's more likelihood of somebody's actually going to read through and see all the different statements about trees. And that's true, I think, for a number of things in here, including where Tony is. I agree that section is amazing. And the way it goes around.
I think it was renumbered because that was one of the original things that, you know, I had mentioned, is that the numbering system was goofed up, and the goofed up part started right there where W, in the middle of W, because it changes from sidewalks to aprons, you know, and it really, if you get down to it, it's like that whole specification section needs to be renumbered and go up to the top and make sidewalks like A, and then B through W would become 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then make the section there in the middle of W should be B, and then everything after that would be numbered 1, 2, 3, 4 with some sub double A's, because it just
So if there's
to the point where I don't even know why I bother even looking at these.
we can obviously improve. Here's what I'll say. We can obviously improve upon the formatting issues. We could spend years literally talking about formatting any document, right? So all of the specifications are here. They're fine, again, with other professionals involved with this. I would offer that, you know, if the formatting is your only issue and you would like a better read document, there's 2 ways to go about it. One, you can accept this. If everything else is fine, we can work on an adjustment to the formatting based on the comments, because obviously people have different opinions about formatting. We can alternatively, like a lot of municipalities, produce a document that is a more easier to read guidance. Guidance is simply a paraphrasing of the code for the purpose of the residents to read, and place it on the website. All right, that's another way to do it. Perfectly legitimate. The specs, the legal language is here. It's legitimate.
Yeah, I think a
That'd be
guidance
a nice idea.
is a good idea.
Absolutely.
If our attorney has looked at this formatting and blessed this formatting, I don't know that there is any added value in spending more time or effort diddling about with letters and numbers.
And I would kind of agree. It does seem to that little section there that's off on its own. It doesn't have its own little number saying concrete approach apron specification shall be in accordance with blah, 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 blah. Yeah, it does seem like it just kind of got pushed in there. I don't know that it needs its own letter. If that's all we're worried about is, does it have a letter? A lot of this, it doesn't make sense to me, but that's because I don't do concrete. So, but apart from that, I don't find it hard to find that. And particularly since it's such an innocuous paragraph, all it's saying is the specification shall be in accordance with the most current edition of the State of Ohio Department of Transportation. Well, yeah, I assume when people or contractors go to make aprons or driveways, they know that and have to build that, since that's the State of Ohio Transportation's base requirements.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
maybe this question is somewhat late, but as you said and I've said and Diane said, we don't know, none of us are particularly adept with concrete pouring. So the background of the parameters here that we're debating, this came from
Westerville.
This came from ODOT. This came from Franklin County, Columbus. Like, do we
use
I guess
Westerville.
I wasn't privy to the beginnings of this. Do we feel that we've had adequate
Yes.
Yes.
input?
Our village engineer has reviewed this and has signed off on this.
Okay, so a legitimate engineer has done so.
Correct.
Oh, okay. I just wasn't privy to the beginning of all of this, I suppose.
That's quite all right. Questions are always welcome. Okay. I'll just go around the table real quick. Do we want to keep holding this up so we can change the lettering in this?
We'll just move on. It's a great piece of legislation. It's passed.
Okay. Does anyone else have any objections to me moving this tonight then? All right, so I will, I might still put it off to the next, well, we'll see how time's going. If we'll untable it tonight and see how close it is to game time.
Well, why
Time for the
bother?
electricity to go off.
You want to
He's
pass.
he's
something?
making a joke there, Tony. He's joking that he would save, 2 minutes by leaving it on the table till next time to make sure that he can watch the game.
Mark, to
Oh, I'm
answer
not
the
kidding you
question,
about this.
to answer the question before, that is the updated verbiage for the military leave that was sent out in the packet at 3:16 p.m. today.
Oh,
And that came from the attorneys
So that is the updated language?
at 3:16 today. Yes.
Okay. So we can, and that's just a first reading tonight anyway, I believe. With no expectation of moving it quicker or anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you check your council packet, it has the updated military leave. Gives them 22 days, 22 shifts, essentially a calendar year, that they can have paid vacation when they're on doing their soldiering. Unless they are on, oh, okay. So if I'm reading this right, if they actually get pulled to active duty and are making more money than they make as a police officer, we don't pay them anything. Is that correct? Is that what I'm reading that bottom part as?
That's my understanding. Chief is going to go over it. He is the one that talked to Annie today. That way you guys can get it from him. And I believe Leah might have even talked to Annie today about it. So just making sure we were on the same page for exactly our expectations. So, and then I believe they may even talk about, our handbook is basically our handbook. Yes, there are rules and regulations and laws you have to abide by, and I'm probably saying something I shouldn't be saying, but obviously all of the laws are not in our handbook. So there are laws that we have to follow, yes, but they're not necessarily, our handbook would be this big if we had to put everything in there. So this is either above and beyond or some sort of variation from it, but ultimately any federal regulations.
Okay,
we would
so
follow.
looking at tonight. All right, and just to sum up, so we can all get a little bit of a break before that meeting starts. So 2020-39, which was the confirmation of SP, is still going to resume tabled. I will make a motion to untable 09-2020, the sidewalks. Second reading of the changes in our permitting language, first reading of the military leave, and we'll need to amend the agenda for 02-2021 to add one non-voting member to planning and zoning, and then of course, look to hear back from planning and zoning on whether they want an additional non-voting member or if that's going to cause too much of a headache or a problem. I don't care enough about it that I would force a third person on them if they, if they really didn't want it. So anyone else with anything?
I just wish this concrete situation had been proper from the get-go, so we wouldn't have to have issues about it.
Well, it's only been 9 months. All right, well, I'll see you guys at 7. I'm going to call this meeting adjourned.
See you later.
All right.